Hey everybody, I'm nutritionist Dr. Mike Russell, and welcome to this episode of the Dr. Mike Show, where we're going to get into another point of confusion or concern. A couple episodes ago, we looked at natural versus unnatural products, the difference between something that's naturally sweetened or artificially sweetened, or something that's advertised as all natural, right? To kind of clear up some of that confusion. So today we're going to clear up some more confusion, where we're going to be looking at plant versus animal proteins. All right, so before we get into our plant versus animal protein, one thing that I wanted to mention is that the Minimally Processed Food Challenge is now live. We actually pushed the date back. I was away in Maine for a couple weeks and wasn't able to kind of get everything together to launch. So we pushed the launch back 1 week. So you can now enroll for the Minimally Processed Food Challenge if you go to minimallyprocessedfood.com. If you're looking at this video and you're watching this on YouTube, you can click, let's say click here, and that'll take you to the Minimally Processed Food Challenge. You can register. The challenge starts on Monday. So registration is only open through Sunday afternoon. And then we're going to start kicking off sending out the materials Sunday evening so we can get started on Monday. Now, this is a live or kind of cohort-based class and coaching program. So if you want to enroll, you have to do it now. You have to join for the next 30 days, and then it's going to go away. We'll have another one that's going to launch slightly, I think, before Thanksgiving, so it would end leading up to Thanksgiving. So you have another opportunity before the end of the year. But if you want to kick your fall off, I know now is a time where people are looking to, maybe kids are going back to school, summer's over, and you're looking for a change. It's a great time for a fresh start. And the Minimally Processed Food Challenge is a great way to do that. Now, if you are, as you'll read, if you go to minimallyprocessedfood.com, you'll read the story kind of behind this, the Minimally Processed Food Challenge, and how I came to looking at food processing as a key litmus test for clients. It was a client that I had who was a major tech CEO, and was trying to work with him with his diet and trying to find what's the simplest thing that we can track and look at that encompasses the 6 pillars of nutrition. And we really came across minimally processed foods as that. So I walk you through in this 30-day challenge. There are videos every single day where we work together to unpack your diet. There are workbooks, there are worksheets. I have hot sheets and downloads that you also can use to help support your minimally processed journey. But at the end, whether you follow a vegetarian diet, whether you are an omnivore, whether you are low carb, whether you are high carb, it doesn't really matter. The principles around eating a minimally processed diet transcend kind of these nuances in nutrition. And when we ran the pilot group this past year, it was in December of last year, we had people from a variety of different backgrounds. We had people who were vegetarians. We had people who were on ketogenic diets. We had people who were eating more of, I would say, kind of a traditional CrossFit or fitness type nutrition program. We had people from all walks of life, and they all were able to apply these principles to their own diet and really grow and improve their overall health, nutrition, and make progress towards their goals. So I love it. It's a great program. We're going to start doing more 30-day challenges because I think it's just a great way to really double down and engage with your nutrition on something specific. And then the repercussions are after that. Maybe you back off. So I'm not saying, hey, let's eat exclusively minimally processed foods for the rest of your life. But you're going to have a new view and a new appreciation and new habits. And you can then choose after these 30 days how to apply them to the rest of your life. So learn more, minimallyprocessedfoods.com, or you can click the link right here if you're watching this on YouTube, and sign up. Challenge starts Sunday night, or technically Monday morning, and I'm really excited to go down this journey with you. So let's talk today about. Let me boost up my seat a little bit. Let's talk today about plant versus animal protein. So got a lot of really good feedback from the conversation that we had 2 episodes ago with respects to natural foods, unnatural or artificial foods, the difference, and does that really matter? And one of the questions, and I was looking as I was prepping for this episode, I was looking at some presentations I put together over the years. And, I've been looking at and addressing this animal versus plant question for a very long time, dating back to 2006, 2007. So I've been around through the evolution of this research and the evolution of the understanding of plant versus animal proteins. What are the differences? What are the benefits, etc. What you should do with your diet regarding plant animal proteins for a very long time. And I think now it's become such a hot topic, and it's out there a lot, especially I think there's been a push of this concept called plant-based diets, and which doesn't really have a definition. It's kind of amorphous, but people will use it as a synonym, or at least cite research with regards to vegetarian diets, when it actually, I think is probably very different than that. So between plant-based diets, and then also, there's been a lot of progress with plant-based protein powders. So for the longest time, if you were going to have a protein powder that wasn't milk-based, like a whey or casein, like synthesis, or an egg protein isolate, which was common for a bit, you were left with these plant-based options, which it was soy, or it was something that tasted like your front lawn clippings. And so there's been a lot of progress with blends of different kinds of plant-based proteins to get much better tasting protein powders. And so let's talk a little bit about that as well. So getting into this, plant versus animal, plant-based diets, the genesis really of a lot of this comes out of epidemiologic research that has to do with cardiovascular disease and overall health, right? So if you look at these large population-based studies, what you find as a whole, and what I've been saying since 2007 or 2008, is the biggest hole we really have is we don't have large population data of people who consume animal products like animal proteins and have other healthy habits. So there's this, when you look at these large population-based studies, and, unfortunately, the way that this data, it's not unfortunate, it is what it is. The way that the data is, brought together, it's decades worth of nutritional data. So there's like a delay. So, we're looking at data from the early 2000s, or we have data from the mid to late 90s, like now, and we want to compare that data to maybe 2005 to 2015. So you have to look at these large time periods that are actually rather removed from where we currently are. And this is sort of just the cost of doing business with a lot of the population-based epidemiologic research. But historically, what you found is that people who consumed more animal proteins, that what they were doing is they had bad habits, so they were more sedentary, they were more likely to smoke, and they were also more likely to also consume a lot more of processed foods, and especially like processed animal proteins like sausages, hot dogs, lunch meat, etc. So then when you compare, and then the flip side of that is individuals who consume more plant proteins are going to be consuming more plants, so more fruits, more vegetables, more beans. Those things are going to be lower in calories, right? They have a lot of innate nutrition around them compared to more of the processed, highly processed, higher fat foods. And so they're going to be innately more healthy. They're going to be more active. And so when you're looking at this comparison, plant protein versus animal protein, you're like, well, plant protein is superior. But I really feel part of that, and superior, I mean, there's an association for a greater reduction in risk of certain chronic diseases. The thing that we're really getting at is so many of these underlying habits. And there's so much more coming out nowadays saying, well, look, it's not just nutrition. It's how do we then optimize a lot of these underlying habits, sleep, stress management, activity, all those sort of things, because they are masking sometimes the effects of different nutrition interventions. And then the other issue, I think, when it comes to understanding what kind of protein is best for you, has to do a lot with messaging and how research is communicated. So there's a diet, I've talked about it a bunch in different episodes of the show, called the DASH diet. DASH stands for Dietary Approaches to Stop Hypertension. And you will hear the DASH diet talked about a lot as being a plant-based diet. And I would say that it is, in that it is rich in fruits, vegetables, and lots of whole grains. But a majority of the protein that you would find in a traditional DASH diet, dating back to the original DASH diet study, and then several iterations of that. The original DASH diet study was like 1996 or 1994. The protein sources there are, lean meats, they're eggs, some eggs, they're dairy products, right? So you're getting still, even though it's described as a plant-based diet, a lot of the protein sources are going to be animal proteins. Whereas, unfortunately, when it's communicated, people say, oh, the DASH diet, it's a plant-based diet, and thus you think it's all of a sudden, it's almost exclusive plant proteins and doesn't contain a lot of these animal proteins. Why this matters for something like the DASH diet, dietary approaches to stop hypertension, right? Hypertension being high blood pressure, is that there was this large population-based data showing that people who consumed a little bit more protein, that it helped lower blood pressure. So they wanted to test this, so they did a study called the OmniHeart study. And one of the studies that, really the study that I led as a graduate student, was mimicking the OmniHeart study at some level and looking at beef as a primary protein in that same setting, higher protein, what were the effects on blood pressure. But with the original OmniHeart study, it took people who have high blood pressure and then said, let's look at about 30% calories, or technically it was 28% calories from protein, and see how that impacts blood pressure. And so if you're a reader of things that I write, or you listen to the show, you're thinking, well, 30% calories from protein, that's like the sweet spot, right? That's like right where we want to be. And what they found was that those individuals had the greatest 10-year reduction in risk of cardiovascular disease. So their risk of having a cardiovascular event or developing cardiovascular disease in the next 10 years was the lowest on this higher protein diet. But again, yes, this diet contained beans, right, which are a major source of plant protein. They also contain whole grains. Unrefined grains can have some plant protein in it. But it was also a lot of fish and poultry and low-fat dairy products, right, which are all hallmark proteins in a DASH diet and all fall under the category of animal proteins. And so what we really see when we look at the clinical data is you see great improvements in, chronic heart disease type metrics in people who are eating diets that are majority, I would say, predominantly majority, either one, plant-based proteins, or animal-based proteins. We did another study when I was at Penn State that was looking at, if you flipped the difference and you said, well, what if it was 2/3, because we're like, let's really unpack this. If it was 2/3 plant protein, 1/3 animal protein, or 2/3 animal protein, 1/3 plant protein, what would be the outcome on metabolic syndrome? Metabolic syndrome, we think of it as like the unholy marriage of diabetes and heart disease, right? And with a little sprinkle of obesity. So these are people who could use, diet and lifestyle intervention. And so there's two things that were interesting. First thing was when we were testing out the diets, we found that the plant-based diet, or the high plant protein diet, was unsustainable. Like, we literally couldn't eat it. We couldn't get we were testing it internally, we couldn't get anybody to eat it for more than 3 days. So we had to go back to the drawing board. We'd add, some more kind of supplemental protein products that allowed for us to hit protein targets easier, and then moved forward with the diet. But basically what we found was that whether it was 2/3, 1/3 plant versus animal, or animal versus plant, that ratio didn't really matter as much from health metrics and also weight loss. So the message here is, when you're getting kind of bombarded with a lot of these, it's got to be plant proteins, it's got to be animal proteins, it shouldn't be either or, right? Total protein matters. So we think of like all the things we talk about on the show. Total protein matters, your total protein intake for the day, spacing out your protein intake throughout the day, right? Look at working to get about 30 grams of protein in every meal, having a faster digesting protein source like a liquid, like a protein shake after exercise. All these things are hedging your bets towards optimizing your protein intake. If you want to make this a majority plant protein versus animal protein, it's really more of a personal preference. But I think that when you look at kind of the nuance, I think that you should actually place an emphasis on quality animal proteins. So beef, chicken, poultry, that sort of eggs, low-fat dairy products. Really put an emphasis on that because the amino acids, like the things that make up animal proteins from a muscle retention standpoint, muscle recovery standpoint, are going to be superior. Like you're going to have a higher concentration of these key amino acids, branched chain amino acids, essential amino acids in these animal proteins. And then, research really shows like if you're going to eat an exclusively plant protein diet, you need about 10 to 12% more calories, more protein to equal the same amount as if you were to eating animal proteins. So just from an amino acid bang for your buck, researchers are now calling this like essential amino acid density. If you wanted to get into kind of the technical term for it, it seems to be is superior with animal proteins. But I'm especially when it comes down to this plant-based diet thing, like I'm a huge believer in like you should eat it all. Like I'm not saying that you should eat beans and you should eat fish and you should eat chicken and you should eat pork and you should eat eggs. Like you should eat all those foods. Like I don't understand where we got to the point of saying if you're going to eat animal proteins, then you're not eating plant proteins, right? And if you're eating more plant proteins, then you're not eating animal proteins. So the animal proteins, if you think of it, they really give you such a great bang for your buck. And nutritionally, they're very nutrient dense too. So there was, it was back, I'm going to say 2014. I did an analysis looking at the role of plant proteins in the diet of adolescents. So 2 years old to 8 years old. And I have some notes so I get all the vitamins correctly. So zinc, calcium, vitamin D, vitamin B12, and iron. So if you take all those nutrients, and if we were to remove animal proteins, milk, dairy products, beef, those things from the diets of people 2 years old to 18 years old, and you look at those essential key nutrients specifically, the source of those nutrients is purely from fortified foods. So it's like refined fortified foods is where people are going to be getting all those nutrients if we start removing those animal proteins. So sometimes we get caught up in this idea, right? And I do this too, especially as a nutritional scientist. Like I'm all about like, what's the nutrient that we're focused on, like protein or leucine or what is it? We step back and we look at this concept of dietary pattern, which I know we've talked about, right? But like the style in which you're eating, and then what are all the other things that come along with that food? So yes, you're going to have salmon, but salmon also, in addition to having protein, also has these omega-3 fatty acids. Like yes, I'm going to have a snack with pistachios, and pistachios, while they contain monounsaturated fats, like they also contain some protein, right? So they're actually, I know I've talked about this before, they're a complete protein from the plant side. So they have all those essential amino acids, but they have fiber in them, right? I'm going to have beef, which has protein, but it also has creatine and B12 and zinc. And so when we eat foods for one reason, there are these nice ancillary benefits, which I like to call nutrient stacking, right? That we're going to stack all these additional nutrients throughout the day by making good food choices. And when we kind of just distill things down to this plant protein versus animal protein discussion, we miss the nutrient stacking benefits. And one of the reasons why, going back, and I'm really going to double down to challenge you to really do both and not make this a plant versus animal protein, is that sources of plant protein also contain a lot of good things. So like, fiber, the fiber in beans is one of the main sources of fiber in my diet. Right. And so, yes, beans contain protein, but they also contain fiber and other nutrients. And so go after it all. Like I have oats in the morning all the time. Oats are actually have a rather high protein content for grains. Right. So that's like an additional kick to that. If I'm going to have a snack, like I always have a snack of pistachios every day. 1 ounce of pistachios has 6 grams of protein. Right. So that's going to have some additional protein plus those other nutrients that I was just talking about. So we can have all these foods in our diet and we don't need to make I'm going to eat this, I'm going to push all that away. And part of the pushback on the pushing away of the animal proteins has to do with this concept that there's this greater health benefit if we abstain from those and we consume more of these plant-based protein foods. But if you look at, as I was talking about with the DASH diet, with the Omni Heart study, with the 2 studies that we ran at Penn State looking at this, that if you're eating quality protein products, so, not overly salted, overly processed, highly refined things that are going to allow easy consumption of high fat foods, right? There's a much bigger difference between 95% lean ground beef that you're going to cook at your house and make tacos with versus, frozen taquitos that have who knows what percent ground beef in them, along with sodium and cheese and a lot of additional saturated fats, and then they're deep fried, right? Technically both Mexican style cuisine and contain ground beef, but very different food products. And that's why we can't make this black and white. It goes back to that living in the gray. I'll link up the episode or the article I wrote about living in the gray and why that's so important from a nutrition perspective. But that's why we just can't make these judgments. And if you look at on plant versus animal, good versus bad, because if you look at the clinical data, as I've talked about, it shows that animal proteins play a key role in supporting good health and can actually, and can improve health metrics. It's not like they're a detractor of health. And I think that's one of the other really big take-home messages of today's show is that they're not detractors of health. Let me see what I want to miss here. The other thing, so fish always comes up here, is that fish is kind of like in this other category. If you look at these, so fish aren't technically, I'm not a biologist by trade, but fish aren't considered animal proteins because they're fish, which is like a whole different class, right? But if you look at these large population studies where we get a lot of the dietary patterns, consuming fish is consistently something that healthy people do, right? And so what is it about fish? And is there something magical about fish? I don't know. I don't think so. But at the end, it's either a very lean source of protein or it's a source of protein that contains omega-3 fatty acids. But what we don't see is that people consuming omega-3 fatty acids supplementally at a population-based level, they don't have the similar health benefits as people in populations that eat fish on a regular basis. So what that makes me think is that it's something about that, again, that overall lifestyle of people who consume fish on a regular basis that is one of the drivers of healthfulness. Because if we distill it down, something like whitefish, cod, or haddock, right, and we're not talking the breaded and fried versions, is just a very lean source of quality protein. Something like salmon is a quality source of protein that has additional omega-3 fatty acids that have additional health benefits. And so one of the things that I've always said, because there is this push to consume more fish for people, you just don't like fish. Maybe you live like I live, like pretty much landlocked out here in Western New York. There's not a lot of fish consumption. Like, that's okay. You can get omega-3s from other places. Like, I generally am going to get it in supplemental form, and I have been for as long as I can remember. And just get other lean proteins and then consume those other components of a healthful diet. And chances are you're going to get those exact same benefits. So fish is kind of like this third wheel in the plant versus animal discussion. But if you don't like fish, don't feel like you have to eat it. I genuinely think it's more populations that show healthier individuals consume fish. It's part of that healthy lifestyle, and it's not necessarily a linchpin, because if you distill it down to just what are the nutrients involved, we don't know anything about fish that would say this is going to be the panacea of health. Next, talk a little bit about protein powders. So I mentioned this at the beginning of the show, and there's an explosion of plant-based protein powders. So for the longest time, it was basically whey protein, and if you want a plant-based protein, it was soy. It was soy or soy protein isolate. For a while, people didn't want to consume soy protein isolate because they were afraid of some of those phytoestrogens and other compounds that are present in soy. That's basically been debunked, showing that there aren't negative hormonal effects of consuming soy products, even high levels of, even high consumption of like a soy protein isolate protein powder. But one of the things that I've said, I actually had this conversation once, and it was kind of like an aha moment for me, was with one of the senior editors at Men's Health, and we were talking about this soy research, and he was basically like, okay, well, let's say that soy is totally fine from a consumption standpoint. What we used to think about hormonal disruption really isn't true. Whey protein is just better. Why not consume whey protein? And I was like, yeah, that's totally true. Like, so you could consume, there's so many different protein products now, and you could consume some plant-based protein powders instead, but there's no innate health benefit, as we've discussed, of choosing plant-based proteins over whey protein or like a whey casein blend, which is technically an animal protein. Like, whey consistently is the best. It's consistently the best protein powder. Like, it's such a dense, concentrated collection of essential amino acids that supporting muscle growth and recovery, it's really good. Like, you could consume 25, 30 grams of whey protein, or you could consume 40 grams of brown rice protein, and you're going to get the same effect. Like, whey is just better at what it does on a per dose basis. So if you have the option and you have no, dietary preference for plant over whey or something like that, or you have no reason to exclude whey from your diet, go with the whey protein supplement. Like, it's just going to be better tasting and more effective. On the flip side, the industry has come really far. Now, they do these plant protein blends that are generally pea protein as the base, with some others like a pumpkin seed protein. Potato protein is becoming a little bit more popular now. So they got a variety of other proteins that are mixed together. They create a good new amino acid profile, and they taste pretty good. Still a little earthy, but they taste pretty good. And so if you, for dietary reasons or personal reasons, want to go with the plant protein, I think you can, and it's a good, pretty tasty choice. But if you have no preference either way, don't feel like you need to go plant protein because it's healthier, because it's not. Go with the one that's going to taste better and be more effective, which, study in and out, year after year, it's going to be whey protein. So we just got to be careful about, why we're applying these health halos to foods, because if plant proteins in these large population-based studies were showing enhanced health effects, but they were coming from people eating nuts and people eating more beans and people eating more whole grains, like, that's much different than like mixing up pea and pumpkin seed protein isolate and then drinking it, right? They're very different things nutritionally, but we're applying health benefits at this population-based level down to a food product because they're both plants and saying they're the same. It's like I once had listened to a great talk at Penn State. It was one of the researchers. They did fruit and vegetable and research with children and just kind of eating behavior with children. And, this researcher said, like, I don't understand why we group fruits and vegetables together. Like, everything is fruits and vegetables. Like, fruits and vegetables are very different things. Like, raspberries are very different than artichokes, right? Oranges are very different than broccoli. But we just kind of lump them together. And so when we say, hey, people or kids need to eat fruits and vegetables, like, that's such this huge umbrella that contains so many variations. And they're very different foods. And that's okay if maybe you like vegetables at some time and fruits at another time. But we can't lump the benefits of this class in and really have it kind of make sense over time. And that's kind of what's happened with plant protein, is we've saw these people who consume high plant diets will have health benefits. And then we've said, okay, well, now this is like, mojito flavored plant protein shake and it's better for you, right? It doesn't work that way. We got to apply that common sense filter to it. Let me see, what are the other things that I wanted to make sure we covered. Fish, epidemiologic, plant versus animal. Talked about Dash Omni Heart. I think those are all the key pieces. So if we were to bring this all back together, things that you want to consider is it should be plant protein and animal protein. Like, go both. Because if you're eating more plants, you're going to by default get more plant protein. But animal protein, you just can't beat that amino acid density, the quality, and those other nutrients that come from animal protein foods. From a protein powder perspective, I genuinely don't see a reason why you would do something different than whey or a whey casein blend, unless you have a dietary restriction or there's another non-nutritional reason why you don't want to consume whey and a whey casein blend, right? They just they taste better and you're going to perform better from a results perspective. When we look at why we're making certain choices and what we're hearing people say that we should do with our diet, we want to just give it the sniff test and say, does this make sense or where is this coming from? Because plant protein naturally consumed in fruits, vegetables, legumes, nuts, seeds, that sort of thing, is very different than plant protein drinking in a shake, right? We've stripped away all that other stuff. It's just like whey protein is very different than drinking milk, right? You've stripped out the calcium and the potassium. Like there's so much stuff that's not there. Some of the carbohydrates aren't there. The fats aren't there. Like it's just different. And nowadays we've gotten so good with food manufacturing that line becomes so blurred. And so we just need to apply some simple logic to it. That's really the key. So I hope this was helpful, this look at plant versus animal protein. And I hope, just like with every show, what you're able to do is kind of listen to what we're talking about, reflect on how it impacts your own nutrition and your own nutrition habits, and then make the best decision for you moving forward, right? That's the best I can hope for. I appreciate you listening to the show. Like and subscribe on iTunes if you can. I'd appreciate that. The Minimally Processed Food Challenge is kicking off, so don't forget, minimallyprocessedfood.com. And also, if you've noticed, if you're watching, I'm wearing, let me see, get here, boom, the Beware of Comfort shirt in honor of the last show where we did with Michael Easter and the discussion of the comfort crisis. This t-shirt, Beware of Comfort, you can check it out at liveessentia.com. So thanks everybody so much for tuning in. Have a great day. We'll talk to you next week.